Hello, Void Dwellers. Before starting, I should point out that this one will contain spoilers, specifically for the Blair Witch project and its sequel. Now, it is known that public taste is not something objective or rational. Not when it comes to politics and not when it comes to art and entertainment. That lack of rationality is the reason that ads work on people. It's the reason that you go and buy a product just because a favorite celebrity of yours said they used it. It's why you believe there's a political emergency in your country, even though many around you don't share that point of view, but they also don't share the specific social media and YouTube channels that you consume. This bias and irrationality happens in art as well, and it is funny when it goes the positive way. For example, most people you'd ask would tell you that Mozart was a genius, and most of them won't be able to explain why they are saying it. It just became something you know if you are a person of culture. See, people don't just go with what they like, what entertains them. People tend to use their perceived likes and dislikes to create the image that they want to project to the world. A cultured person knows that Mozart is a genius and that pop is absolute garbage. Even though if you analyze Mozart and some of pop's greatest hits throughout the decades, you realize they share a lot of their components with each other. I would argue that if Mozart lived in modern times, he would have been Michael Jackson, or Prince, or the person who writes songs for such acts as Britney Spears. And Beethoven, if you analyze his musical style, his attitude towards society when he was alive, his ambition within music, I think it matches the metal genre, which became famous in the late 80s and early 90s with such bands as Metallica or Megadeth, or the progressive metal branch of music with bands like Dream Theater. But every cultured person knows that Beethoven is a genius and metal is just noise. And the same is true when it comes to other forms of art. I'll never forget that female friend I had as a teenager. We were both great readers and did share a taste for less known books and hidden gems and classics. At one point, I got hooked on the Harry Potter books. This was before the movies came out. But even just in the world of books, it was quite a phenomenal success. And she simply refused to read it. Even though I sang their praise and told her it was exactly the kind of things that we like to read, especially from book 3 on, but she would not have it. She said it was too popular to be good. I later realized that she made the attitude of knowing books that no one else knows a basic part of her image, of the way she wanted people to perceive her. So she would absolutely not read anything popular, even if it meant denying herself something that she would have loved. And I don't think I've seen this phenomenon more prominent in any other medium of entertainment as movies. It goes beyond even just self-perception. When it comes to movies, people seem to want to be part of the group, part of the right group. And they will go against themselves, their own pleasures. They will delude themselves that reality is different than what it is, even the reality of what they themselves think. Take a look at the Matrix sequels. Let me tell you a little secret about those sequels that might have escaped you. They are really, really good movies. They are phenomenal sequels. And the first time you saw them, you actually had a blast. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They expanded on the lore, they raised the bar, they made the story more complex and complicated, they had better fight scenes, more elaborated action scenes, they continued to spearhead the digital revolution of the time, and they were more philosophical and deep than the original. Throughout the years, I heard people trying to explain why they supposedly dislike them, and the reasons are just absolutely ridiculous, especially when they try to compare it to the original. For instance, I would hear people say that the sequels are cheesy because of the power of love theme that goes through them. But at the same time, for some reason, Trinity bringing Neo back to life just by admitting she loves him in the original didn't seem to bother them. How come? Because it's not about cheesiness. People simply knew that they are supposed to hate the sequels. even before the sequels came out. And I got to see that knowledge in real time. I'll never forget going to the third one, Revolutions, and as the movie ended and we all started moving out, a group of 3 teenagers were talking next to me, talking enthusiastically about how awesome the movie was. And that scene was mind-blowing, and when the machines did that, and when Neo did that, they were all smiles and excitement. And then one of them said, "Yeah, but it kinda sucked, it wasn't like the original." And immediately the other two, as if they were reminded of the pre-screening orders they were issued with, agreed with him. From the moment their asses left the seats to the moment we were all standing outside on the pavement, the movie went from being this mind-blowing, once-in-a-lifetime experience to being a piece of shit movie that wasn't worth the money. They completely fell in line. The other extreme of that is when the first Disney Star Wars movie came out, The Force Awakens. People just knew it was a good movie. I, as a very old and not that difficult fan, walked out of the theater after Han Solo was killed by his emo son, realizing that this was nothing but a badly written fanfiction with a budget. It brought absolutely nothing new to the table. It was basically a repeat of New Hope but written significantly worse, and it spat in the face of established lore from previous film. But people love it. People seem to need the next one to realize the flaws. And why? Because they were told it's a good movie on the one supposed virtue it had. It was filmed on location, and we're going back to the basics. The entire marketing of this film was based on people's dislike of the sequels, a dislike that in itself was artificially manufactured by the internet. As people like me who were old enough to be there in real time might remember, the response to the sequels when they came out was very warm and enthusiastic, especially episodes 1 and 3. But the internet started this nonsense about they use too much green screen, which makes zero sense as criticism, especially these days when everything is pretty much green screen. The prequels were pioneers of that widely adopted and popular tech, but the internet pushed this insane and ridiculous point as something that only a connoisseur of both cinema and Star Wars would get. And slowly but surely, much like the king's new clothes, everybody started to see what they wanted to see, what they were supposed to see, because nobody wanted to be thought of as a fool. And then when The Force Awakens came out, they just leaned on that nonsense. And if you didn't appreciate the movie for not using as much CGI, then you weren't a real connoisseur to begin with. You have to appreciate that in order to establish your wisdom and good taste at hating the sequels. But by the second Disney movie, the insult to the characters and the lore was too much that even the blindest fan couldn't ignore that, and the spell was broken. And to me, one of the most tragic victims of this irrationality in the human creature when it comes to art and entertainment is the horror movie Blair Witch 2. If you talk to people, they'll behave as if it's one of the worst horror movies to have ever been made. But if you watch it, truly watch it, you'll find that the statement is at the very least an unbelievable exaggeration, or outright false, as it is one of the best horror movies I've ever seen, and I've seen them all. But it was dead on arrival, for no fault of its own. Almost everything about it is terrific. The cast is phenomenal. You have 4 actors who carry the majority of the movie on their backs, and each and every one of them is an amazing performer. And we're talking theater material here. And even the little side characters, like Sheriff Cravens, played by the late Lenny Flaherty, are played by amazing character actors. Hell, I would love to have seen the Sheriff Cravens show. He has such good lines and he delivers them so wonderfully, it's a pleasure to watch. And the movie has a terrific story with mind-bending ending. And it is connected not just to the lore that was introduced to us in the original movie, but it actually critiques the phenomenon that happened around that movie and the gullibility of people to anything that is filmed in video. One of the characters in the movie actually says, "Video doesn't lie, film does though." And that was the attitude that many people had, still have to this day. And this is a spoiler, it is video that is the downfall of those characters. Now, many people like to point out that the studio forced the director to make changes that ruined the movie. But if you look at what the changes were, as they appear on the Wikipedia page and other online sources, they are unnecessary but minute enough to not really change the movie all that much. They just made him add a bit of graphic gore, which was ridiculous for a Blair Witch movie since it's not that type of horror. But the suits are dumb fucks who never have any idea about the art they invest in. And the second change was the opening music, which they replaced with the heavy metal sound of Marilyn Manson and his song Disposable Teens. Because the suits figured, what, it's a horror, right? And people who love horror love metal, and all horror movies are just a guy in a mask picking off teens, right? It fits. Honestly, if we didn't need the suits' money to make art, I'd say let's just ground them into a fine paste and see if we make them into something useful. Anyway, the changes are not good for the movie, but they don't take away that much of it. But don't take my word for it. I challenge you to watch it yourself, but watch it properly. You don't have to watch the first one, but I would at least see some kind of summary about it. And when you do watch it, do it alone, in a dark apartment. Give yourself the chance to be immersed. But most importantly of all, you need to read about the phenomenon that the first movie was and the lore that it introduced. You need to know who was Ellie Kedwood, who Rustin Parr was and what he did, what happened at Coffin Rock, what happened to Eileen Trickle. The movie expects you to know all those things, and it doesn't stop to explain them to you. It's part of its genius as well as its downfall. See, this movie is not just a sequel to another movie. It's a sequel to a social phenomena. It's a sequel to the entire Blair Witch phenomenon. And it is one of the most meta movies to have ever been made. And that is why it failed. It was way too clever for its own good. To understand what this movie is really about, you need to understand not the original movie, but the original hype and hysteria surrounding that movie. Because these days, fake found footage is so common you have YouTube channels that are dedicated to it. And honestly, kids who watch the original Blair Witch Project these days are thoroughly unimpressed. There are better movies out there in that genre. But you need to realize that when it came out in the late 90s, we've never seen anything like it before. The actors filmed the entire movie themselves because that was the point. It was supposed to look like proper found footage. The producers created this website with all the lore in it, including fake police files and stuff like that, but they never indicated that it's fake. Honestly, the way they presented things, I kinda wonder about the legality of it all. There was no indication that this is fiction. Even on IMDb, the actors had their profiles changed to say that they are missing, presumed dead. And these were not well-known actors. The first time you look them up in IMDb was probably because of the movie. And IMDb was the real world. You expected that what it said has to be real. So when the movie came out, first of all, the found footage angle made it far scarier for people. Especially when watching in theaters with a proper sound system, because a lot of the tension comes from the sound design and the way the producers made eerie noises around their cast and how little of it the simple microphones they used actually picked up. Because of its originality, it gained this reputation of being the scariest movie of all time, which is the kind of hyperbole you should always be suspicious of. And even after it was made clear that it is a fictional movie and that the actors are all alive and well, people still thought the lore was completely real. And there was actually a time when hordes of movie fans descended on the little village of Burkittsville, Maryland in the US to the dismay of the locals, because the creators did use a real place for their fictional story. So the phenomenon that surrounded the film was really unprecedented. And of course the studio wanted a sequel immediately, because they are greedy morons. In truth, the Blair Witch project doesn't need a sequel. It works as a one-off. And what would the sequel even be? More found footage? It was actually tried in 2016 when the third sequel came out, and it wasn't well received, even though it was not a bad movie in itself. It just didn't bring anything new to the table. But the producers of the original understood it was impossible to make a sequel all the way back in 1999, so the studio went to a documentary director, Joe Berlinger, and he very smartly said, "I'm not going to do a proper sequel. I'm going to do a commentary on video and on the way people fall for it." And in his movie, the characters live in a universe where the Blair Witch Project is in fact just a movie, but the lore itself is real. And the theme of the movie is history or hysteria. Do they actually see what they think they see? Or did, like so many others who believed in the Blair Witch lore, they just convinced themselves that they see what they see? See, the point of the movie is the group's descent into madness, where you can't really be sure of anything. At the end of the movie, they see videos of themselves doing horrible things, and they have no memory of doing that. And we, the audience, we'll have to wonder, did we see the actual reality and the witch altered the videotapes? Or did we see their delusion and video indeed never lies? And it seems to me that while the studio wanted the people to believe that the Blair Witch was responsible because they think that the paranormal is more popular, and thus demanded the ridiculous additions to the movie, Berlinger's idea was to keep it vague but lean towards the idea that these four people have simply lost their mind. It is a very clever film, and it is a terrifically entertaining one, and a creepy horror movie to boot. So how come it was so reviled? Because it was deemed bad before it even existed. Because there's no way that a sequel could ever create that same feeling, that same awe that being exposed to something completely new can bring to you. Because this movie demands that you watch it several times and think about it to actually get it, to actually enjoy it. Because it is misunderstood. Because people don't want to bother thinking, why did an actual documentary filmmaker choose to make a sequel to a mockumentary in the form of traditional film? Because people at this point wouldn't admit to like it even if they did. Because that would expose them in their minds to be Philistines of movies. Only smart people can see the new king's outfit. So of course they see it. And it is a glorious outfit, isn't it? So next time you make a judgment about art, in your heart of hearts, ask yourself, am I being genuine here? Or do I have a reason? Do I have a motive to want to have a specific opinion?